The 80s were a crazy time in my life. I'm not proud to admit I was a major drug addict back then. I've since reformed and have turned my life around. I've been sober since 1990. This story was my wake-up call and is the main reason that I left that life behind. Back then, I was working as a window washer in Birmingham, Alabama. I lived in a small apartment just outside the city. In those days, a lot of contraband came through. I was kinda sort of friends with my dealer. We'll call him Chris. I have known Chris since high school. He was always a bad seed and had a criminal record the length of my arm, which is to be expected in this line of business. We had a sort of standoffish relationship. He tried several times to get me to hang out at parties with him and go to bars and whatnot, but I always declined because I never fully trusted him. However, as my addiction became worse, I began to let my guard down more and more. It was a Friday night. I remember this clearly because I had just gotten paid, and being the pathetic addict I was, I called up Chris as soon as I cashed my check. Hello. Hey Chris, it's Richie. Are we good for a meetup? Yeah, I need you to meet me somewhere else tonight. Why? Because I don't want to get busted selling this shit to you in the same fucking place over and over again. The police came and knocked on my door this morning, accusing me of slinging dope. Oh, shit. Really? Yeah, and it's a good thing I don't keep my stash in my house, or I would have been fucked. But they are watching me, and I think someone is running their mouth. Chris, I'd never... Look, just shut up and drive out to the abandoned church. Be there by 7. Chris abruptly hung up. The church Chris referred to was located roughly 30 minutes outside the city, towards Coburg. I had only been there once back in high school, when a mutual friend of ours had a keg party there. I thought he was overly paranoid, wanting to meet me all the way out there, but I had to play by his rules since he was the one with the supply. I made the drive out there and was sitting in my truck outside the abandoned church, which has nothing but a heap of charred remains, barely standing. That party I mentioned took place in 1981, so someone took it upon themselves to torch the place. Since then, this was before cell phones, so I pretty much just sat there and listened to the radio while I waited for Chris to show up. I looked at the clock on my dashboard and saw that almost an hour had gone by since I arrived, and there was still no sign of Chris. It was now dark out as well, which was making me feel uneasy. This Chris was off a back road near Interstate 22, which was practically in the middle of nowhere. There were no street lights or anything out there. It was when I was thinking about how if anyone was outside, the only thing they'd see is my truck's cab light, and I started to feel like a sitting duck. I tried starting up my truck to get out of there, but my dumb ass had nearly drained the battery by sitting there with my radio on. As I tried turning the engine over, I got the feeling that eyes were watching me. I turned on my headlights. I looked up, and a wave of dread came over me as my headlights illuminated a horrifying sight. Standing in front of my truck were 3 figures. The first thing my mind was able to register was a pair of antlers on top of a deer head, and for a split second, I thought maybe a trio of deer were standing in front of my truck. But as I looked closer, I saw the figures were standing upright. Then I came to the horrifying realization that what I was looking at was 3 men dressed in deer skins. I began to panic and started to turn the key in the ignition. I didn't know who these deerskin wearing freaks were, but I didn't want to stick around to find out. As the sound of the engine failing to start rang out, I watched in terror as the 3 figures began to move closer. "Come on, you piece of shit!" I yelled as I slammed my foot on the gas pedal, while continuing to try and start my truck. With each attempt, the headlights flickered, and as the figure slowly closed in, I could see that the middle one was holding a shotgun. I closed my eyes and began to pray for God to help me out of this situation while pressing down on the gas pedal. Suddenly, I heard the sound of the engine roaring to life. I didn't have time to be relieved as I quickly threw the vehicle into reverse and hauled ass. I looked up to see that the deer people were much closer than they were before. However, that's not what scared me. What scared me was the shotgun pointed directly at me. Not a second later, I heard a shotgun, and I felt a hard thud as one of my headlights were blown out. I did not stop the truck as I quickly backed out to the back road and then floored it all the way back to town. When I got back home, I immediately called Chris, but there was no answer. The next day I drove out to Chris's trailer and knocked on his door, but no one came. I didn't know what to make of the situation, and I decided to call out of work for a week and lay low. Chris was found 2 weeks later on the side of a road about 15 miles away from the abandoned church. He had been bludgeoned to death. I came to the police with my story and told them about what happened to me. But the death of a known drug dealer wasn't exactly a priority for them. They did, however, try to get me to confess to killing Chris multiple times. Even when I showed them the damage to my truck, I could see the writing on the wall. The police were too lazy to investigate the case, so they tried to pin it on me, using my drug addiction to support their bullshit theory. They harassed me with parking tickets and stakeouts until I finally moved away a year later. I still have no idea who these deer people were, but I'm convinced that they were the ones who killed Chris. My guess is that Chris got to the church before I did, and they ambushed him. To this day, I'm grateful to be alive. The moral of this story is that you should stay away from drugs. Not only will they destroy your life, but they will also put you into dangerous situations. I have always had trouble dating, as all of my relationships end in utter defeat. As bad as they are, though, I'm someone who can't stay single for the life of me. It's a real problem. My first relationship started just after high school. It was one of the tamest breakups, too. The girl's name was Tiffany, and we had met each other outside of school and eventually got together. Nothing too bad went on in that relationship except for the constant running around she did. She was oblivious to what she was doing and what a relationship meant. She'd make fun of me for getting jealous, like I wasn't supposed to feel that way for her spending more time with anyone else. I decided to break it off after a few months of this. I couldn't take it anymore. She would constantly rush off and be with other guys and tell me I'm being controlling when I'd tell her it made me feel like she didn't like me anymore. Once that relationship ended, I did not date until I was out of high school. I finished up sad and lonely. So, after high school, were a few girls I went through. The first one was after I got kicked out of my parents' house for being 18. I had a girl move in with me to my first apartment and help with bills. We ended up sleeping together and eventually dating. It came on quick and felt natural. Her name was Mary, and she was a very sarcastic person. I lived with her for a long time and got really close to her. She'd constantly pick on me for being sensitive to her jokes. She'd make a joke like she's got other guys lined up ready to take her away and tell other people that I'm small. It was really uncomfortable. She finally said this in front of everyone I know and everyone she knows, and I got tired of it. I blew up on her. at home, and she acted like I was doing something wrong. She got mad at me for defending myself, and when I told her I was tired of her making fun of me and spreading lies about me, she called me a pussy and said I was being too sensitive. I'm sorry if I can't take one insult after another. She moved out of my apartment, and I fell into a depression after that. The place started piling up with trash and clothes everywhere. I stopped really taking care of myself and things got bad. I talked to a friend for therapy and somehow got over myself and got back to near normal. He even helped come over and clean my nasty place. I started getting desperate a little bit later and heard about a dating app called Tinder. Tinder felt like a golden opportunity to get some real date with no strings attached. Maybe it would have been if I knew what to look for. I was stupid and would take anyone. I got on the app and found a girl I liked. She was cool, and she wanted to meet up with me after talking for a few days. So for all I knew, she could have been a crazy person, but I didn't care or so much as think about it. I made plans with her to meet up at a local bar. She was absolutely late and made me wait around the bar for an hour before she showed up. I didn't mind that at the time, but she did this all the time. I dated this one, which I forgot her name, for about 6 months. She was cute and great to be around, but I couldn't handle her either being late all the time and the problems that caused, or just standing me up altogether because something else was more important than plans we had. She could have at least told me that she was standing me up all the time, but instead, I'd sit there long enough to know she wasn't just going to be late, she wouldn't be coming at all. I had enough of that and got back on Tinder. I decided to give it back to her and not even tell her that I was breaking up with her. She'd find out when I didn't talk to her anymore. I believe that was fitting, given the situation. The next Tinder date messaged me and asked me out. She was actually everything I was looking for in a girl. She wasn't mean and abusive. She did exactly what she said she was going to do, and she didn't have plans to ruin me. She had her own place. She was renting for another year before her agreement was up. We'd seen each other for a year before we started having problems, and it was because she started getting distant. I found out why. She'd told me, one of my friends through Facebook, that she only loved me for what I was going to have later on. I was completely broken when I saw this. Basically, her plan was that she was going to get with me, and when my parents died and I got my inheritance, she'd be rich. I don't know how she found out I even had that coming, which I don't want that time to ever come, but what she didn't know was it wasn't going to be much of anything. My parents were humble in what they had and didn't have super high paying jobs, hence why they kicked me out at 18. I had all the time that I was a lazy 16-year-old who didn't have a job to help support. This isn't what this story is, though. So, I showed her the messages I had from her and told her that if she was looking to get rich off of me, she would be sadly mistaken. She disappeared shortly after that and stopped talking to me. She blocked me on social media, and that was that. I still see her around from time to time, and she gives me dirty looks, like I did something wrong. The next girl I dated from Tinder was someone who decided her only personality was whatever anime she'd watched the day before. I thought it was cool that she watched anime as well, but even 3 weeks of this got really tiring. She'd always pick the most annoying character to imitate. As if that wasn't enough, she made me really uncomfortable because she would act a third her age and make some really fucked up jokes about it. Needless to say, she didn't work out at all. The last and final girl I dated pushed her way in. Tinder really fucked up this one matching us up. So, as soon as I messaged her a few weeks after meeting her, she was in distress, and what she made it seem like she told me that her ex had kicked her out and she needed to get off the streets. Red flag number one, she should have been that when I picked her up. She came out of a house with bags packed after hearing yelling inside. I didn't put two and two together and figured this out. The stress of helping someone out got to me and clouded my judgment. I didn't even think to say anything. When she put her kid in the car, I drove her back to my house, and she made herself right at home. In the coming months, she never got a job. Her kid was allowed to do whatever he wanted and destroyed the house, and the bills started piling up. She just sat on her ass and ate. I asked her many times to get a job, and she refused, saying she couldn't. I asked her one day to leave, and she would not. At some point, I wasn't with her anymore, but for some reason she wouldn't believe that I didn't want to be with her anymore. I tried to keep the peace, but she'd always make up something from thin air to bitch at me about. No wonder her ex was kicking her out when I met her. I had to borrow money from a friend to get her out because I was told I had to evict her. After she was finally gone, I was more broken than I'd ever been. My parents were oddly supportive, as they had really never been before now. They told me if I wanted to come back and live with them, I could. I decided not to. I wasn't going to put myself in the position of potentially getting kicked out again. I have been alone ever since. I brought a dude in to help me pay the bills and get ahead, but we have a rule that as long as we are living here, we won't be bringing girls home. Tinder is now off the table for me forever. I'll deal with the crazies around my area that I find in real life, not the ones that I find on a website that are potentially more crazy. This happened to me when I was a teenager, probably around age 14 or 15, but finding this subreddit has made me think a lot of it. Some background for the story, of course. I hate clowns. I always have and always will. I'm not 100% sure why, but they creep me out and make my skin crawl. However, over the years, I have found this is the general consensus among most people, as I have rarely met someone who loves clowns. Take it away, Quanisha.
So my friend and I just finished watching a movie at the theater and was inside our local mall. The movie ran late and probably finished around 10 p.m. The mall closed at around 9 p.m., so it was dark and all the stores had their gates down. And it had a spooky enough feel about it. The doors were locked from the inside, so we walked to the mall to the other side, which had doors close to the trail we used to walk to go back home. Nothing was out of the ordinary at all about this until we got to our exit. Now, since it was nearly 2000s, the mall still had payphones and they were in a little foyer area. Don't know what else to call it though. So there was one set of doors, then the foyer and with the phones, and then a second with a set of doors on the outside.
We opened the first set of doors, and sitting in there was a fully dressed clown. I'm talking big, red, floppy shoes, comically oversized pants, stupid red nose, and that stupid white face paint. This man, in the awful costume, was middle-aged, probably in his 50s. He was not on the phone. He was just hanging out in there.
We hurry past him as I'm breaking out into a cold sweat and go through the double doors to the parking lot, and he follows us. I'm about to pass out and die at this point, since him just being a clown was creepy enough. But now that's also a middle-aged man following two 14-year-old girls outside adds a whole other element.
He's calling out behind us, and we are ignoring him. He continues to try to get our attention, and we start picking up speed. As he gets closer, I try listening to what he's saying, and he's literally just talking nonsense. Nonsense. I catch a phrase here and there. One of the things I can make out is him talking about how it's a full moon, and look how big it is. But he's talking to us, not himself.
So we make it to the other side of the parking lot, but this is the part where we head into the woods to cut through the trail to head home, so I definitely didn't want to see this man following us into the woods. We made some sharp turns and hid behind a car, and after a while we just lost sight of him, and hopefully he had lost sight of us. And we hauled ass into the woods, Thankfully, we escaped unscathed except for the creepy memory of this clown man. And I gotta say, there ain't nobody got time for that shit.
So, creepy clown man who hangs out alone in malls at night. Let's not meet again.
Motherfucker.
If you're new, go ahead and hit the like button and subscribe to my channel, as it really helps me out. And if you are already subscribed, welcome back and thank you for subscribing. Okay, now with that out of the way, let's get into today's video.